Action.
Hi everyone, I'm Beth Johnson, and with me as always is scientist Frank Marchis. And this is the Grudge Report, SETI Institute's science show following Star Trek Discovery's latest episodes. Spoilers abound, so fair warning, if you haven't watched the latest episode, turn back while you still can. Hey Frank, what's on your mind this week? It was a pretty good episode for me. I liked it.
Yeah, very good episode, very inspirational. A lot of stories related to science and to what's going on in space, but also to conservations of species. So that's what I would like to talk about today. But maybe first, before we go through the tiny scientific details, tell us a bit about the story. So we finally found the Federation.
We find the Federation. They use the spore drive to get to the coordinates, and they basically find a temporal distortion that is masking the Federation from everything else. So they have permission to go through it, so they go through, and then they get to basically see what's left of the Federation, because it turns out this little bubble in space is basically all of it. So there's a few ships out there, but for the most part, this is all of the Federation operations is in this bubble. And the crew geeks out over all the new tech that they're finding. There's alloys that were just theoretical. There's holographic structures. There's organic structures. There's a tiny, tiny little Easter egg in there honoring the USS Nog, because the actor who played Nog passed away last month or the month before. What is time? Mm-hmm. And so that was really sweet. And then they talk about how the USS Voyager is now on J, which means it's the 11th iteration, and how amazing is all seeing like the time go by, which I think is interesting. So that was pretty neat.
Yeah, I kind of, in my case, I like the technology discussion around it, but I also noticed that in this nest of spacecraft, there was one of them, it was very interesting, which is basically an artificial planet spacecraft. Mm-hmm. We've seen that. We basically see this gigantic structure. It's kind of flattish. There is some forest in it. So maybe
right, Tilly calls it a floating rainforest. Yeah. So they've obviously managed to find a way to sustain themselves through science.
So that's the way we could live in space without a planet, basically.
Yeah, and we've seen a few of those hypothesized mostly in artists' illustrations and that kind of thing, these ring world type situations where they're spinning and provide their own artificial gravity, and you can grow things on them. And, I'm pretty sure we've seen a lot of those images. So this was kind of just, for me, one more iteration of it, but this one seemed, obviously, it's Star Trek, it's functional.
Yeah. All right, so, well, the welcome was not very what they expected. They were not very welcomed by the Federation.
It was not entirely warm, was it?
Because they're crime. I like this. They use that. A temporal.
Yeah, it's like, we spent the whole last century fighting for, against time travel, and here you guys show up from 1,000 years ago, so now you're criminals. It's like, well, how does that work? They committed the crime technically before it was a crime. So
legally, I'm sure a bunch of lawyers will be on the case already, starting to think about how we're going to be addressing the issue.
So somewhere out there's a law review of Star Trek.
Yeah, so, well, they're a crime. They're not very welcome. They want to disband. The Federation want to disband the spaceship and the crew, basically. But of course, there is a tiny story here, more interesting. So we have these Kilis. Those are the species, right? Who are
right.
sick.
The Kili.
The Kili, because they visited a planet called Urna, and they basically probably ate something bad, like I don't know, any species will do. They started feeding themselves with plants or animals or something that was bad for them, and they get a sickness from prion.
So they basically ate what would amount to like irradiated food, but not irradiated in a good way. So they went to a planet that Michael explains was basically just starting to be figured out that it was an industrial waste complex at that point. And so, yeah, they fed themselves from there and created a problem with their protein, the folding of their proteins. And so they were sick and dying, but fortunately not contagious. But now they have to, of course, go and find an original plant that has been unaffected by this. And that's where Michael brings up that, hey, there was this seed vault floating in space. Like, do we still have that? And it turns out, amazingly, yes, they do. And I kind of am fascinated by this idea of a seed vault in space. So that seems, it's not, obviously, we're bringing this up because there is a seed vault here on Earth.
Yeah.
In Norway?
In Norway, in an island in Norway. So I did a bit of research about it. I knew about it as well because it's been like in the news when it opened in 2008 or 2010, I forgot. It's called the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. So it's in Norway. It's on an island called, sorry for my Norway, Spitsbergen, in the remote Arctic Svalbard archipelago. That's what I found out.
And I had looked it up on Google Earth because last week there was a story that came out about a certain sandwich cookie opening a vault down, quote unquote, down the road from the Svalbard seed vault. And so I was kind of, it really is remote.
It's very remote. So the reason they send it there is because it's remote, and also because it's a very it's in kind of a mine, and it's cold. And of course, if you want to conserve seeds for centuries, you don't want them to start becoming a plant or destroying themselves by fermentation. So you basically put them in a very dry and cold environment. And the seed bank is that. It's basically 120 meters deep. It's very cold.
It's basically built into the permafrost.
Yeah.
So they've basically dug into the permafrost and built it there so that it maintains that temperature.
So that's interesting. Is why do we do this on Earth, and why now in the future in the Star Trek movie they're doing that? So on Earth, the reason is simply because we want to keep all the seeds that have been used in the agricultural world. We have like 13,000 years of agricultures on this planet. And I want to make sure that we have the original seeds, because seeds change, mutate, and also get destroyed. I mean, you can imagine, like, for instance, if an entire area of the world is being destroyed, then all the plants will disappear. It can be destruction by a nuclear holocaust, or by tsunami, or etc. There is plenty of reason for which plants can be destroyed, and then they will lose the original seed, which is generally the seed which is adapted for the environment. Right. So the Svalbard is made for that. And I look online, they have almost 1 million type of seeds, 967,000 at the moment. Yeah, it's pretty an amazing piece of architecture and science. Yeah. And nobody's there, by the way. As far I was reading that they don't work there. They basically, if you want to get the seed, you need to get access. You go over there, you get the seed, and that's all. There is nobody staying in the place. And only twice in the history since the creation of this seed bank, they use it. And twice it was for the same reason. It was after during the Syrian civil war. An organism called the International Center for Agricultural Research in the Dry Area, which has a headquarters in Aleppo, had to move to Beirut. And this move was due to the civil war, so they have much time. So they basically moved the team, but they left the seed behind. And they asked for the seed bank to send them back some of the seeds. They grew them again, and they sent back to the seed bank some seed. So that's one of the reasons we do this as well, is to make sure that in case of war, we can still have access to those seeds for the future. Right. Right, because you never know what's going to happen, and losing an agricultural resource is always a terrible thing. Yeah. So let's go back to Star Trek. So the teacup is that. The teacup is that. It is their version of that seed vault, except instead of holding species from just one planet, it holds species from every planet in the galaxy. And it's amazingly beautiful on the inside when you get into the actual seed vault. You know, it's just these rings with little,
I don't know. They looked to me when they got it out at the end, they look like little tiny shuttles. Like they look like they're based on that. So you can kind of see the seeds in them, and they're tucked in all these little cabinets. And it was just an amazing look. And so they've gone to get a non radiated, version of this plant, because then they can make an antidote based on it. And they have to do things in a hurry, of course, because it's Star Trek. And everything has to be done in a hurry. And, everybody's going to die in a matter of hours if we don't do this. So they're racing to get these samples back.
Yeah. So I just want to mention something about the vault that you did not mention, is that the vault in the spacecraft, the takeoff, has the same structure than the vault on Earth that we have now.
It definitely was. Whoever designed the spaceship in the show definitely took it based on the architectural style of the one here on Earth. So it has that same sort of metallic, very straight lined, lots of angles kind of look to it. It was really, like, as soon as I saw it, I went, oh yeah, no, you based that on the seed vault in Norway. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and the color, the bluish color of the center. So the artist is called Diveke Sane. He's a Norwegian artist. And the reason he designed the vault with this kind of bluish pattern is because he wanted this vault to be always visible, no matter what. And don't forget that up north there, in the winter time, there is darkness for 24, okay? So that's the reason. The entrance and the vault is always illuminated by these bluish patterns, allowing anybody to find it.
So the other thing about the takeoff was who it's probably named for. Now, I don't have this as official confirmation, but there was a scientist by the name of Gavril Adrianovich Tikhov, and he is considered to be the father of astrobotany. He passed away in 1960, and he did all of this research on life on other bodies in the solar system. So he, was trying to work on that, and so I think it's a really neat little shout out in there to a scientist I don't think a lot of people know about. So he's got an asteroid named after him, of course. But yeah, so I thought that was a nice little touch that they put that in there.
Oh, that remind me, if you watch us on YouTube, we will have a SETI talk in December on the color of exoplanets, and we're going to talk about the plants of exoplanets. So if you want to know more about plants on exoplanet, watch our SETI talk in December.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Good plug.
Letting it here. Okay, so in the takeoff, they found the seed, etc. But it was not that easy. In fact,
it's never that easy, right? So of course we had to have some sort of, it couldn't be that easy kind of situation, as if it's not hard enough, everything that's going on. They get to the takeoff, they're not reading life signs except one that blinks in and blinks out, and so everybody of course assumes, well, it's a radiation problem because they're in the middle of an ion storm, and there's still some interference even though they've pulled the ship out, and yeah, it's a stressful situation. And they finally find the doctor that's running the ship. His family is gone. He had a wife and 2 daughters. They are unfortunately passed away. They are in cryostasis chambers, which does nothing. And he is out of phase somehow, where he comes into phase and then he does something and then he immediately gets pulled back out. So they start doing some research, and they ask, the team on Discovery, how does this happen? And of course, my favorite characters all come up with, check for the nearest star. What are you looking for? We're looking for a CME. So Frank, what is a CME?
So a CME is a coronal mass ejection. So it's basically, that's what they say, and I think that's the best way to describe it. It's basically a starburst. So
I love Reno. I love Reno so much.
I think that's the best way to explain what this is. So stars are not like perfect, stably stable in terms of activity. If you look at stars, let's talk about our sun to start with. You will see that we know now for years that the sun has a cycle of activity. Every 11 years, it has changed from low to high. Right now we're in a low level, by the way, low activity. When the sun enters in high activity, we start having all these these sunspots, which are dark spots imperfection on the surface.
Which we're starting to see again. I have
yes.
astrophotography friends of mine are taking more pictures of them.
This week or last week, the first one appeared for quite a long time. We were all excited to see that. We saw it with the Eviscope, by the way.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So these structures indicate the presence of an increase of activity. So an increase of activity is basically the sun is getting more active, getting more solar wind, but also more solar flares. Solar flares are this ejection that you see. And we're going to try to put some pictures in this video. I'm going to send you a picture of solar flares that will pop up here or here or here. I don't know where we're going to put it, but I'm hoping to be able to do that. And those solar flares basically eject in space plasma. Plasma is basically atoms, ions, and the magnetic field with it, okay? And these CMEs, coronal mass ejection, are basically that. They travel through space, so it takes 4 or 5 days for them to come from the sun to us, to give you an idea of the timeline here. When they reach our planet, they could be dangerous. I mean, they don't kill people like we see in the takeoff, but they do have an impact. So I did some research. It's very interesting because we have been basically touched by those coronal mass ejection in the past. In 1999, one of them reached our surface of the planet in March 1999, and basically caused the major failure of the electrical system of Quebec in Canada.
Right.
And also interferences and so on. That was in 1999. I forgot which year was that, but there was a big one in the time where there was telegraph in 1850, and it's called now the Carrington event, where basically all the telegraph system of our planet collapsed. And people there is paper written about this, but basically they could not even send messages. And when people were touching the instrument, they were getting electricity because of the interaction with the network of telegraph with those CMEs.
Okay, that story I didn't know. That's really interesting.
Yeah, so so these are real. Those have happened, and in fact, they are dangerous for human in space. If you are in space, especially like let's talk about the people in the International Space Station and the people that will go to Mars, they may cross a CME, and in this case, this will have an impact on their health. A lot of radiation, basically say that they will have a lot of mutation in their body, more cancers, and also it can be radiation so strong that the impact could be in a few days. They can basically start having symptoms of high radiation, of being in an environment with a high radiation.
So it's not the pulse that likely killed the family outright. It's the results of the pulse, is what you're saying. Is that the radiation? The radiation
carried by the solar wind that reach you. The closer you are, the stronger, because this varies by the distance. The intensity decreases with the distance, of course, and also there is more ions when you are exactly in front of it, close to the sun or close to the stars in this case. So that's maybe what happened in this case. And of course, I'm assuming this, but the people look kind of okay in their cryogenic phase, but maybe they have some internal damage in their organs.
Well, he does say that at the end, Hugh points out that, when they're trying to take him back to Discovery for medical treatment, that he does have a lot of radiation damage to his organs, that he might have been saved as immediate a death simply because, and here's the Star Trek science of the episode, he got hit with the CME while he was transporting into the seed vault, which caused him to be out of phase. So they basically have to shut down everything and transport him again to get him back to normal. But the radiation damage is still there. And now it, of course, is actually going to have a chance to take hold because he's now back in phase with reality. So I could see how that would be the logic that we're going with here. So we'll go with the Star Trek logic on this one.
Yeah. So just to go back to the CME, those are interesting because they also could be a limitation factor for the presence of life on planets. If a planet is habitable, but the planet has no magnetosphere, for instance, or the planet is close to a very active star, like M-type star could be very active, we know that now, they generate a lot of flares. Those flares will basically sterilize continuously the surface of the planet. So there will be no life on the surface. Maybe there is life underneath, but that will be a very different life in this case.
Right.
So that's something, that's a very important parameter in the search for life, to know the activity of the star. And in fact, there was a debate when we discovered TRAPPIST-1, the system with 7 planets. TRAPPIST-1 is a M-dwarf star, and with 7 planets. Some of them are habitable, but maybe these planets don't have life because they're being sterilized by the activity of this.
And when you say habitable, what you mean is they are at that distance from their star where liquid water could exist, which is the main criteria we've been using to say it's habitable, although that criteria continues to expand. So now I know we're also looking at atmospheres and magnetospheres and radioactive elements that are available, that kind of thing. So we keep kind of building up a further definition of habitability. But in the case of TRAPPIST, all we were looking at really was where can we have liquid water?
Without taking into consideration the fact that the star has a flare activity, which has been measured in the past. We know that, so that will probably change the type of life you have on the surface. I'm not saying there is no life because because the planet is around M-dwarf, but it will be very different life.
Right.
So it's a debate in the community at the moment, and it's an interesting debate because there is also the story that those CMEs are bringing radiation on the surface of the planet, so they're also helping for mutation. If we didn't have this CME, probably we will not have mutations, and mutations are important to evolve species. So there is always kind of the thin part where you have not enough mutation, so enough radiation, not enough radiation. It's a very complex biological problem, and I'm not a biologist. I'm not going to tell you much about that. But to go back to the CME on Earth, and that's very interesting, is that if this happened again, and there is a calculation made by a physicist called Pete Riley. He calculated that a Carrington class event that I mentioned, the one that happened in 1850, could happen. There is a 12% chance that an event like this could happen in 10 years. So 12% chance is kind of a big number. And the problem we have now is that we don't have telegraph. We have satellites. And also have humans in space. And those satellites will be affected by this CME if you reach Earth. So we need to be able to predict those. So the SETI Institute has a program with the FDL, the Frontier Development Lab. Every summer we host astronomers, geophysicists, heliophysicists, and data scientists, and they work together in answering to some of the questions of NASA or other space agencies. And one of the questions was, could we predict CMEs? And I think we're making progress because we are now capable by looking at the sun continuously with all those instruments to predict when this event will happen.
So without that prediction, how much warning do we have from a CME?
4 days.
4 days?
Yes.
And so what is the plan in place if that were to happen? You know, we do have a ton of satellites. We rely on them for communication. We rely on them for entertainment. We rely on them for navigation. And plus we have, 3 to 6 human beings up in space at any given time these days. What's the plan? Is there a way to protect our astronauts? Is there a way to protect our systems?
So for systems, one of the protection they have is to turn them off. So this way the radiation will not make them enter into a phase where basically the satellite is neither on or off and there is nobody over there to press the button and do the master reset. So let's turn it off before, wait for the CME to go through and turn them on, hoping there will be no damage. It's not perfect, but it's better than having the satellites in a weird state, which we don't have any control. For human, there is no real plans. In my mind, they will need to be protected by, right now in the International Space Station, the humans are in the magnetosphere of our planet, so they're slightly protected. but there is no real protection on the International Space Station for this. They will need to be shielded by water and by lead or something, and we don't have that on the International Space Station.
So this would also be a consideration if you're setting up, say, a station on Mars or the moon. You'd have to do that because neither one of them have magnetospheres either.
Yeah, that would be a major issue for. And Mars has been touched by a CME 4 years ago, something like that. All the spacecraft over on Mars and rovers detected the increase of radiation due to CME. Mars is further away, so that's
a bonus. It's weaker, but the moon is not.
The moon is not, definitely.
So, all right. Well, I think that kind of covered all of the science on the show. I thought the episode was pretty good. I'm looking forward to see what happens with Philippa. Something's going on there. There's just so much. There is so much. I am excited the book will be back next week because I was really worried that they seem to be kind of shedding characters a little. Yes. You know, we've left one more behind on this one. So I've been worried that we wouldn't see Book again, and all of a sudden the name of our show would be meaningless to everybody because where'd the cat go? So obviously no Grudge sightings today. Hopefully we'll get one next week. But yeah, so the season continues rolling on. I think they're really kind of hitting their stride in season 3. So I'm excited to continue doing this.
The big outcome of this episode is that the fact that they found a meaning. Remember, we were talking about that 2 episodes ago, that they were like kind of lost, they had no meaning. They're back to the Federation. True, the Federation is extremely advanced technologically, but they don't have the spore drive. They do.
Right. And the spore drive is key right now because dilithium is in short supply.
Exactly. So they can go to any place they want in the galaxy. And the captain of the ship used this interesting analogy with Giotto.
Oh, right. The Renaissance painter and exiting the Dark Ages.
Exactly.
Looking up.
Looking up, basically, Giotto is a Renaissance painter that invented this way to design in 3D. It's called the 3-point perspective. Mm-hmm. If you Google it, you will see a ton of video to explain this. It's one of the most known way technique to draw in 3D. You can draw an entire city in 3D. Giotto basically invented that. And thanks to Giotto, suddenly, of course, pictures became more interesting. Painting became more interesting because they had this 3D perspective that was missing before. Mm-hmm. And the captain said, Giotto basically gave us another way to look at the world, to make us look up, and that's the way we get out of the Dark Age. So with this spaceship capable of traveling using the spore drive, they will basically bring something else, another dimension to the Federation. That's right. That was a beautiful analogy, and it's very interesting that somehow in the show they put some historical references like this.
Yeah, I liked it. It was nice, and you know, I'm always looking to Star Trek for some hope, and it's nice to see it back in this series.
Yeah, I see the Giotto painting when there is the Halley Comet when I was a teenager. I think it's in Florence, and I do remember seeing this and say, "Oh, that's cool, a comet." And that's one of the moments where I kind of get interesting in astronomy. So that's why Giotto.
So there you go. That is a personal thing for you. That is really fascinating. Thank you, Frank, for sharing that. All right. Well, I think that's it.
Well, thank you very much, Beth. It's great talking to you as usual.
Absolutely. This is so much fun. I'm really enjoying it. So we'll be back next week, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. SETI is funded by people like you watching us. So if you go to SETI.org and feel like you want to help contribute, there are ways to do that over there, and you can easily sign up for our e-newsletter and continue to see some of our science stories coming out. So take a moment and give us a like, a share, a follow, all of the places. We are SETI Institute pretty much everywhere. Feel free to leave a comment here with your thoughts on the episode. Obviously, there's some strong feelings and mixed reviews, and that's okay. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you next week. Live long and prosper.
Bye. Good. See you. Thank you.